Hi everybody and welcome back. Today will be the first topic that we're going to be talking about that is very, very specific and focused as far as an issue in the criminal justice system where we'll be using psychological principles at play specifically, not broadly like we've talked about before. And today that topic is going to be alibis and alibi corroborators. The first thing we want to do is we want to define our terms, right? What is an alibi? Well, an alibi is really just a defense that places the defendant at the relevant time of the crime in a different place than the scene involved, and so removed therefrom as to render it impossible for one to be the guilty party. Right? Essentially, an alibi is just a claim that you were elsewhere when a crime happened. Right? I couldn't have been the Boston bomber because I was in Florida at the time of the Boston bombing, right? So it couldn't have been me, right? If an alibi is actually proven false, it is considered as supporting guilt. And if an alibi cannot be proven, it's pretty much just considered as neutral. We don't know if he was there, but we can't prove that he wasn't either, right? And so it doesn't really help or hurt if it can't be proven. But before we move on, that is a super important distinction that if we prove an alibi false, it clearly means that the person was lying and must be guilty in some capacity. So, psychological issues that are present regarding alibis are as follows, right? Memory issues regarding the likelihood that someone can recall what they were doing at a particular point in time are actually pretty low. And this is really the point of your discussion for this week, right? It shows that we have a pretty hard time of remembering what we were doing days, weeks, months ago, and even further, we'll have a hard time figuring out who can help corroborate what we were doing, right? So there are a lot of different individual perceptions of alibi quality. Some people view alibis to be more truthful than others. Sometimes people can be mistaken as to where they were, but also sometimes people can lie. And if we look at the chart here that we see this forgetting curve, right? And the retention is there on the y-axis and elapsed time is there on the x-axis. And we can see that even as short as 2 days after something happened, our memory for an event has dropped down to less than 30%. Even more startling than that, an hour later, we already have forgotten half of the stuff that we had learned or perceived when we did it. And so really we see that this forgetting curve can be quite problematic. Now, we've already talked about on the first slide or second slide that proven alibis that have been proven wrong are evidence of guilt. What if you forget where you were, though? What if you mixed up Tuesday and Wednesday? Right? And I was like, oh, like this past weekend, for example, my wife and I went and played Topgolf. Did we do that Friday night or did we do that Saturday? If I said we did it Friday, but we really did it Saturday, that was just an honest mistake on my part, right? But I might be viewed as being deceitful and therefore guilty. So, what makes a really believable alibi? Well, first of all, there's two kinds of evidence to prove where you were on a specific date or a specific time, right? There's person evidence and physical evidence. Person evidence are people that you're with, right? That can say, I was with Dr. Behl at Topgolf on Saturday, right? Physical evidence would be the things at Topgolf, like my receipt from Topgolf, like security camera footage from Topgolf. Physical things that show I was there at Topgolf at the time I said I was there. Physical evidence in terms of alibis is very, very difficult to fabricate, and so it's typically a little bit more believed than person evidence. But that doesn't mean that personal evidence is bad. Now, granted, there is some easy to fabricate physical evidence. Like I could have a receipt that doesn't have my name on it from the location, but typically physical evidence is a little bit more believed than person evidence. But we're going to talk about the different kinds of personal evidence here in a second. So Olson and Wells in the reading that you guys had to do for this section talk about three different kinds of person evidence. Well, first of all, there's none. That's a fourth kind, I suppose. But there's motivated familiar other, non-motivated stranger, and then non-motivated familiar other. A motivated familiar other would be someone like a very close friend or relative, right? They're motivated to potentially lie for you, right? Hopefully, Lord willing, my wife would have a vested interest in me not going to prison, depending on the day and how well I've behaved. She doesn't want me to go to prison. So if my wife is my alibi corroborator, she would be considered a motivated familiar other. A non-motivated stranger would be someone who's in no way motivated to lie to me, but is a complete stranger. The disadvantage of a non-motivated stranger, while they're not motivated to lie for me, they also might not actually recognize me. And I've been confused for a lot of people, like, Brad Pitt or Channing Tatum or Ryan Gosling or something. And so they might see me and be like, golly, he looks familiar. I feel like I've seen him before. But they're more likely to actually make a mistake in my identification or my corroboration for alibis. The last one is a non-motivated familiar other. This is someone who's familiar with you and not likely to misidentify you or misplace you, but also not really motivated to lie for you either, right? This might be someone like a typical waitress that you might have, or a barber that cuts your hair consistently, right? They know who you are, they definitely know they had you because they have a kind of a relationship with you or a rapport with you, but they're certainly not going to lie for you either, right? I consider all of you guys as students of mine, if we were in a face-to-face class, kind of as non-motivated familiar others. Y'all aren't going to lie to me or lie for me and risk getting in trouble yourself, but you definitely know who I am and could pick me out of a lineup pretty easily, right? And if we look here, we see that the least believable evidence is when there's no alibi corroboration. If I were to just say I was sitting at home taking a bubble bath by myself, that would not be a very good alibi, and a lot of people probably wouldn't believe me. The best alibi would be something like a non-motivated familiar other, according to Olson and Wells, like a barber or something, and also security camera footage that showed me in the barbershop with that barber. That would be the most believable alibi. Now, one of you guys hopefully remember from the readings for this week for Olson and Wells is that there's really not an empirical difference between a non-motivated familiar other and a non-motivated stranger, right? And so those two things actually are kind of interchangeable, which is why you see on this slide that they've flip-flopped. And really, there's not really that much of a difference between the two, right? And so if we were to look here on least believable to most believable, really it could go either way because that non-motivated familiar other really just may not actually exist. So if we were to look at what alibis consist of, seeing this taxonomy, right? As far as person evidence is concerned, people have done a lot of evidence or a lot of research to try and find out who is likely to be your person evidence. And Colhane et al., for example, in 2008, found that non-Hispanic white people are most likely to hang out with friends, whereas Hispanic whites are most likely to hang out with family. Right? And so their alibi corroborators are probably, for Hispanic people, more likely to be family members. For non-Hispanic white people, they're most likely to be friends. Friends are viewed a little bit differently than family members, especially if you can get a couple people that aren't super close friends to you, because they start falling into that non-motivated stranger or non-motivated familiar other category, right? And so just in general, who people hang out with and are around more often is more likely to affect the credibility of their alibi, right? We know that Hispanic populations in general tend to be very, very family-oriented, which means that their alibi corroborators are most likely to be family, but also most likely to be viewed as less credible because family is more willing to lie for you, right? Olson and Charman in 2012 also did an experiment where they had participants provide alibis and then given time to return with proof of their alibi, right? And so we have you in a lab, we say, where were you 2 days ago or 30 days ago? And they say, here's where I was. And then they said, okay, go out and find evidence to prove it and show back up. 30% of people changed their alibi from 2 days before, And about half of the people change their alibi from 30 days before, right? Which means when you're at the moment and you're asked to remember where you were, people actually, as we saw from the forgetting curve, tend to forget kind of a lot, right? Sometimes as much as half the people couldn't remember where they were 30 days before. A lot of the evidence provided for alibis was also very, very weak. 81% had no or very weak physical or person evidence, right? 6% had a non-motivated familiar other, and 9% had strong physical evidence, right? Like the strongest physical evidence, like video recordings or something, right? So really, if we look at that in and of itself, by itself, 81% of people, even if they remember their alibi, don't have very good evidence to support their alibi. Now, what does that mean? If they're accused of a crime, what are they going to do? They don't necessarily have a lot of evidence to even support their claims, right? So research on alibis has shown why alibis from innocent people are so bad, right? In large part, the reason is because innocent people may lack the necessary memory for specific times and dates, right? Imagine if you were at a music festival all weekend where there was a lot of alcohol involved. You might not really remember where you were at specific times and dates because you might have some memory issues, right? They might generate mistaken alibis. I might remember, like, let's say for sake of argument, I was at Bible study. Every Tuesday night, my wife and I go to Bible study. Let's say that, I don't know everyone's name really all that well in my Bible study. I know a couple people that I'm closer with, but I don't know everybody's name. For example, I know there's a kid in my Bible study named Timmy fairly well. If I said to the police, go ask Timmy, and he'll tell you I was at Bible study, but then I remember, actually, last week I didn't go to Bible study because last week was the 4th of July, and so Bible study was canceled. They go ask Timmy, hey, Timmy, were you with Dr. Behl on Tuesday? And Timmy says, well, no, I wasn't. I just generated a mistaken alibi, right? Because I didn't remember that it was 4th of July and therefore a holiday, right? And they also, innocent people very well may generate weak or uncorroborable alibis, right? It very well may be pretty much every afternoon and evening on school nights, my wife and I sit at home, we cook dinner, and we watch TV or play cards together in our house, right? Just the two of us. That's genuinely where I am most nights of the week. I'm not bragging about my popular social life, but the truth of the matter is that might be what happened. It's just not going to be very believable, right? So, how are alibis? Well, law enforcement, future law enforcement, and lay people were all compared, right? There was a study to see how do we evaluate alibis, right? And law enforcement, future law enforcement, and lay people could not differentiate between true and false alibis. They were unable to tell the difference between the two. And this is similar to typical studies on lie detection, which we'll talk about in a couple lectures from now. But genuinely, there was this issue where even trained law enforcement officers were not very good at evaluating between true and false alibis. Everyone, though, was way more skeptical of alibis that had changed regardless of the veracity, right? So I might have said I was at Walmart and then remembered, oh no, actually that day I was on the other side of town and I went to Target. And I might even show up with video camera footage of me at Target. But because I made a mistake, automatically my alibi is going to be viewed as significantly more skeptical, right? And so if we look at some more research on it, and we look at the investigation versus the actual trial, we see that alibis are rated as stronger in police investigations than in a trial context, right? During investigations, we're more likely to believe an alibi and view it as having higher veracity than during a trial. And that's probably because during a police investigation, an alibi was deemed, or I'm sorry, we'll get to that in a second. During a police investigation, an alibi was deemed stronger when it was corroborated than it was uncorroborated, but this is not necessarily true during a trial. And in large part, the reason for this is because if there's an alibi that's presented at trial, the assumption is the police knew about the alibi and the prosecutor knew about the alibi, but chose to move forward with the trial anyway, which tends to give people the idea or the belief that maybe the alibi shouldn't be believed because everyone still feels comfortable moving forward with it. Whereas in an investigation, if an alibi is shown to be true, then the investigation typically stops for that person. Another question is, does the relationship between the relation to the suspect and confession presence affect whether a potential alibi will proffer an alibi corroboration, right? And so what we found is that essentially in this study, and Kinsley is a professor now up at Brockport, who I went to graduate school with, and Levitt here is actually my academic advisor. And what we found is actually that, or the way it was manipulated actually, was that we had a friend, a stranger, and a non-motivated familiar other all participate in a lab setting, and we asked someone, will you offer alibi corroboration for the person? Some people said yes, some people said no, and then randomly we showed them a confession and said this person actually confessed to the crime. Does that change your answer at all? And so first of all, what they found was there was a main effect for relationship status, such that friends were significantly more likely to offer an alibi corroboration compared to strangers, right? And we expect that. There was also a main effect for confession presence, right? If there was not a confession, 60% of people said I'll offer an alibi. If there was a confession, that number dropped down to 39%. From time 1 to time 2, potential alibi corroborators were less likely to want to be an alibi corroborator after hearing about the suspect's confession. So a lot of people, if they were told about the confession after they offered the alibi corroboration, actually changed their mind and switched. They said, never mind, I don't want to be involved. And that's a huge thing. I also did some research with my advisor that I don't have a slide on, but I can talk about it very, very briefly, where we manipulated whether or not the police asked suggestive questioning affected someone's willingness to be an alibi corroborator. So we said, hey, it'd be a really good thing to do. You'd be helping this person out. Will you serve as an alibi corroborator for them? And people overwhelmingly said, yeah, of course I will, if we asked questions that way. Compared to if we asked questions saying, hey, you probably don't want to get involved. I understand this is awkward. A real friend wouldn't put you in this situation. You probably don't want to offer an alibi, right? When we ask questions that way, a lot of people said, oh, yeah, you're right. Never mind. I don't want to get involved, right? So even the wording of the question can affect an alibi corroborator's willingness to serve as an alibi, which shows some other issues that people might have, right? And basically what this all comes down to is if you get accused of a crime, genuinely, depending on who your alibi is or what your alibi is, really depends on whether or not you're even going to be believed as to if that alibi is true or not. And what happens if the police don't believe your alibi? There's a very good chance they'll move forward and try and convict you for that, right? Now, what can we do about this? What can be done to help Well, can we help alibi evaluators differentiate between good and bad alibis? Unfortunately, not really. If they generate an alibi for themselves first, we need to help people understand that changing alibis, or maybe alibis without corroboration, are not a bad thing, right? That maybe, people have mistakes in their memory quite a bit, and maybe we have experts testifying in court saying that. But we really don't know and don't currently have good methods for differentiating between true and false alibis. So for your discussion this week, really think about where you were a couple days ago, what kind of evidence you could collect about it, and what issues might that actually present for you if you were going to be under investigation for something. And really start to think about, what might happen if, for some reason, you were accused of something that happened a couple days ago when you had that evidence. I look forward to reading your discussions, and as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out and let me know.